Hello and greetings to everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to the final installment of the Demystifying Post-Productions webinar. And I hope that everyone is doing well today. And I really cannot believe that today is actually our last episode for Demystifying Post-Productions webinar on color grading. Time flies. And yeah, throughout the series, we've been discussing about developing look from in form of lookup tables alongside the cinematographers and round tripping it from pre to post productions. And if you've just joined in this episode and you would love to rewatch or catch up with the previous one or any other webinar hosted by Maxon Training Team, and you can visit that old webinar or the previous installments in the YouTube channel under Maxon Training Team. And there you can watch any webinar that you like and also get the downloadable materials in the video descriptions if there are any. And today, in this episode, we are joined by a special guest, a cinematographer, a director, post-production supervisor, and our very own Chief Creative Officer at Maxon, the DV Rebel himself, Stu Maschwitz. So if you have any burning questions about film emulations, I think this is the perfect time to ask Stu about it. And also joining us today is Anthony Barry. Tony is finishing editor and post-productions consultant based in Los Angeles. And Tony also direct and shot some of his documentaries movie. And recently he just finished some YouTube original series. And those series are about the untold stories about refugees athletes, and you can check them out in YouTube as well. It's called Strive, the Untold Stories of Refugees Athletes. It's really nice one. And I think you were collaborating as a finisher editor, right, Tony?
Yes, sir. Thank you
Awesome.
for sharing that.
No problem.
That's a hell of an intro.
Cool. And also joining us today is Diego Yama. Diego is the director and colorist at Estudio Rocco based in Colombia and also a master trainer for Blackmagic Design. And for those of you who want to learn more about ACES, Diego has some good series about ACES, setting up ACES in Resolve. And those videos are provided for Netflix, but you can still access them in the new digital backlot brand account under ACES setup in DaVinci Resolve. So as you already spot, probably another panelist today joining us is Simon Walker. Simon is the head of training and learning here at Maxon, and thanks to Simon that we could keep hosting this fabulous series of demystifying webinar. Awesome.
See, the trick is you do all amazing stuff and I just turn up. So
Perfect.
Nice. And myself, my name is Max, and I'm the resident colorist and trainer at Maxon. So before we jump straight to the point, to the discussions, let me point you out to some fun facts. You can get free t-shirts if you go to the link provided in the chat, and there you will find the PDF source and file, and there you can see that there's a link to a Maxon merch store. And if you go to that link, and you will be asked for a code, and you can enter the code provided in the PDF link, and you can get the t-shirt, any t-shirt that you want. Oh, okay. Color to set, let me. So, yeah. You can try it on your end. You can order any shirt that you want, and you just need to pay for the shipping cost, which round about $4 or something like that. And if you use any Maxon product, and for example, Magic Bullet Look, and if you want to test your knowledge, and you can do so by visiting our certifications page in maxon.net/certifications. So there are 3 different certifications: the elementary free certifications, and also 2 different Cinema 4D certifications. So you can use these certifications as a memory jogger. There will be like 50 questions that you will take, and to pass, you need the score of 85%. And if you pass the certifications, for example, in Magic Bullet Suite, you will get the certificate of acknowledgements as well. And that's it about certifications. For upcoming events, you can go and check in maxon.net/events to see the upcoming events we are hosting. And previously, I talked a little bit about Stu's blog, and you can visit Stu's blog under prolos.com. There is a really great resource. There are tons of resource. If you're a 3D artist or cinematographer or also colorist, there are plenty to be learned. So without further ado, let us get into the discussions. And Stu, yeah, what can you tell us about film emulations? We're really excited to learn more about film emulations today.
That's great. Thanks, Max, and thanks all of you guys for having me here today. And I'm super excited to participate. Ooh, do I get to do the poll too? I don't get to. It's for attendees only. The poll just popped up for me. But yeah, why don't I share my screen here a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of about film in general, shooting on film, and kind of creatively what that means. And please jump in with questions as we go, because then we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what we love about film and how we're trying to kind of preserve that look and feel into the digital age as we, acquire footage from a wide variety of sources. So a few years ago, we embarked on this project of creating a product called Magic Bullet Film. And it was an effort on our part to kind of do a film emulation tool that was as useful and creatively friendly as the Magic Bullet tools are kind of known for being. And in the very earliest days of Magic Bullet Looks, we had this idea kind of under the hood that was based on kind of my dual careers as a director and kind of color, I don't know, aficionado to and a VFX artist. I felt like because of my history with visual effects, I had this understanding about how film worked and how we could kind of emulate certain organic processes in a digital way. So Magic Bullet Looks itself was really designed around this idea of kind of simulating a film camera. We had the model of adding filters and emulating processes like bleach bypass and all of that. But what we didn't have for years was any sort of attempt to model actual specific film stocks. So on one glorious day, we had this amazing shoot where we capitalized on the fact that a friend of mine who's been commercial director for a very long time just had this refrigerator full of short ends of film that he had been kind of hoarding for literally decades. And and we were able to get together almost every kind of representative film stock from Kodak and Fuji, a bunch that had been even discontinued, and do this incredible shoot where we had these color charts and models and adorable dogs and even a dork in the background there petting the dog. And really kind of cataloged and captured not only all these film stocks, but also different film processes as well. So we were able to do a skip bleach. We were able to push the film stocks and pull them, which I can talk about a little bit, and result in Magic Bullet Film, which is not only a standalone plugin that works. I'm here in After Effects, but this works in Premiere and Final Cut Pro and Resolve. But these also became tools that work in Magic Bullet Looks as well, so you can kind of integrate it into the whole Magic Bullet Looks process, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But what I thought I would do a little bit to begin is just talk about film itself and our kind of long love affair with it. And like a lot of things about just the movie making process in general, what started as a technical necessity gradually evolved into something that was really well understood as an art form, and then as we migrated away from it and started to shoot digitally, we became abundantly aware of something that we were kind of missing from the good old days of film. And there are directors today who still insist on shooting film. There is definitely a sense that film has a certain power over us visually that digital acquisition struggles to achieve. I hope that's fair to say, but that seems to be kind of the kind of popular consensus about the issue. So why is that? You know, it's one thing to kind of understand that that's the case, but it's another thing to dig in and try to understand why that might be. And if we understand why, well then, you know, in the kind of Steve Yedlin sense of like, if we can measure it, well then we can, you know, replicate it, right? So so this is a little cross section of a piece of film. And it's so much simpler to talk about black and white film. But basically, you know, we all have heard this idea of these silver halide crystals, right? This sort of idea that like film has this silver chemical component to it. And what happens is that this is a film negative, which means that as light is exposed to it, it ultimately is going to create a dark area on that negative. And the way that happens is that just light hits these crystals and they react chemically to being exposed to light. And then when we develop them, we kind of freeze that moment of some of these little particles have been exposed to light and some of them haven't. And we apply this fixer chemical to it and we kind of hold that moment, and then we make it so that we can pull that out into the daylight and look at it, and it won't continue to expose. So that concept of light hitting these things and exposing them carries with it a lot more nuance than is immediately apparent just hearing those words. Because what happens is that if a certain amount of light hits it, it's a little bit exposed. And if more light hits it, it's more exposed. And we kind of know that the way exposure works in digital, if I just take this this shot here and apply the exposure effect to it in After Effects. And again, I'm doing a lot of this kind of work here in After Effects, not specifically because After Effects is the place to do a lot of your color correction work, but all these tools work in all our kind of supported host platforms, and this is just a more fun place for me to kind of experiment with and show you guys some ideas here. So if I just take the exposure slider and begin to crank it up on this image, you can see both in the image and in the scope here that as I expose, basically the values just kind of start slamming into the top of the range, and you can see this dense pile up here, and you've got this very harsh overexposure and these very ugly kind of colors. You know, her skin that was wonderfully nuanced here has now turned orange and yellow, and we've just peaked out at white. And this is kind of a typical look for a digital overexposure. And everything we know about film tells us that this is not how film behaves, right? So let's do a fun little experiment here, and let's actually model a film negative here. So I've got this piece of footage from our test shoot here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just apply the invert effect to it. So I'm just going to make it into a negative just for fun. And maybe I'll also just make it black and white for the sake of simplicity. So let's monitor and float here so we get a nicer looking scope. Okay, so I've got this idea of this negative, and what I'm going to do just to kind of model the idea of, instead of increasing exposure, the idea of increasing density on a film negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the blend mode of this layer in After Effects to multiply, and then I'm just going to duplicate it. So you can see that it makes the image darker, and since the image is negative, that's the kind of emulating the notion of adding more density to the negative, which is adding more exposure. But watch the values in the scope here. Whereas before we saw them sliding just right off the top and trying to like leave through the ceiling. Watch what happens as I keep duplicating this layer. Watch how instead of sliding off the bottom, right, they're just piling up at the bottom. And this is kind of like my weird digital simulation of something that is kind of weirdly magical about film, is that as we would hit this layer of celluloid with more and more light, those little chemicals in there are not just stopping their work. They will respond to more light and more light and more light. And you can shine a flashlight on them and they'll get really, really dark, but then you can shine the sun on them and they will, even though they're kind of maxed out by what the flashlight did to them, they will still find a little more density to record there. So film has this incredibly high dynamic range, but it also has this kind of gradual response to overexposure. So think of it as the difference between slamming your car into the brick wall and slamming your car into a giant foam pad. We were talking about it earlier, it's like a Tempur-Pedic mattress for light. It just, no matter how hard you hit it, it's gonna respond a little bit. So we're trying to kind of digitally model that here using just the multiply blend mode, because as we multiply, we're not gonna like slide past zero, we're gonna pile up into increasingly close to zero, but never quite there. So then of course what we can do, let's delete those layers and kind of start fresh, but let's simulate the idea of putting a print stock on it. So we can put a little invert adjustment layer at the top of everything. So we've got our image back. And now let's model that overexposure again. And you can see that as I'm multiplying the layers, you can see that my blowing out that's happening on my digital film. And now we'll actually remove the black and whiteness of it, and we can model it in color as well. You can see that like her skin stays skin color much longer and we don't get that peaking out to yellow. And we get this very, very gradual sense of overexposure. And even as I've duplicated this layer like dozens of times, you can still just barely make out some of the details on her there. So, but you do notice some problems like this yellow chip here. So it's not perfect. This is not a perfect model, but it does start to show you a little bit of that kind of ineffable quality of film. A lot of it has to do with how it responds to an excess of light, and then a lot of it has to do with how it responds to color as an excess of light is created. So what we did is we went back to this footage that we shot, and we did a few things. We kind of did a kind of a baseline, simple kind of neutralization of this color cast the different stocks had based on things like their sensitivity to tungsten versus daylight light and that kind of thing. And then we carefully ran it through a process of mapping these known color charts into what ultimately become a series of advanced lookup tables that are kind of wrapped up in a process that then I think the real zhuzh of it is that we also then add this idea of getting some artistic control onto it. So let's just look at like a piece of footage here. This is just a little project I did where this guy is training you on how to defend yourself against a zombie. And you know, typical. And I'm just gonna apply magic bullet film to it and choose video as my source here. And you can right off the bat see a bunch of interesting things happen here. So let's widen out here and look at like this red barn here and then get a bit of the sky in there. So this, I'm intentionally choosing a piece of footage here that isn't particularly professional. This was shot, I think, on a Canon 5D or 7D or something like that. And you know, we're almost overexposing with the sky. And there's a lot of like pretty rich saturated colors in the red. You're starting to see some of that signature digital quality, including like the way his shoulder is overexposing here. Like we're already kind of starting from a place of you know, we've got digital artifacts already in the footage. So that's a big thing about Magic Bullet Film, is that we didn't want to create a system that required you to have shot on, you know, an Alexa or some kind of, you know, perfect professional digital camera. We wanted to be able to handle a variety of sources without requiring you to necessarily know a ton about how it was shot, because if you're the cinematographer, sure, you know every last detail about what the camera was and what the settings were, but a lot of times in an editorial situation, you're just handed some footage and you're lucky if it still has the slates on it, let alone something like a color chart or even necessarily information about how it was shot. So
quick question, Stu,
yeah,
about
please.
the footage. There was a question earlier, and I just want to verify. You mentioned that this is 5D footage, and then the other stuff that you were shooting that was F55, that was S-Log2, S-Log3?
Yeah, are you talking about that test footage that I was looking at there?
Yes.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we've got, yes, that's right. So
Yeah.
on this test shoot, we had, in addition to all the film stocks, we shot this part with the F55, and we also shot the same footage with the Alexa. So here's the Alexa with an ACES lookup on it, and here it is without. So these were kind of our baselines. I also think, what did I had like a, at the time, I think a Sony A7S2.
FS7? Okay.
No, it was the little, it was the SLR.
A7S.
The
Yeah.
A7S. Yeah, I think it was the original A7S or the A7S2. I got that one as well. So we were kind of trying to, you know, not only, and we shot with the 5D. So we were trying to kind of profile a handful of typical acquisition methods that Magic Bullet Film user might have, you know. All right, so let's get back to Zombie. Yeah. Yeah, so, and by the way, we boiled all that down for Magic Bullet Film to 3 choices: video, flat, and log, you know. And technically this was shot, you know, with the sort of Prolost flat profile. So really this is kind of the result that like one would be encouraged to get out of the process. But because the lighting of this was so harsh, you know, it kind of looks better out of the box if I just pick video, but I could also pick flat and just go here to contrast and reduce it. And now we're kind of getting into the subjectivity of film emulation. And this is something that I think is an insight that I can bring to this process from a variety of experiences. Like I worked on the Blade Runner Final Cut restoration, and this was like a project that we all felt was like really important. And I was overseeing a flame session as we were removing a Steadicam shadow from a shot near the end of the film, which was always one of my little favorite sort of Easter eggs as a film fan, is that you could see this perfect shadow of a Steadicam late in the film, and then all of a sudden it was my job to remove it. But that was not quite as egregious a revisionist history thing as I've been guilty of committing in my special edition history. So the problem with the shot was that they couldn't find the original negative. They felt like maybe it had been damaged or somehow lost. And so we had the highest quality intermediate print that we could get, and that's what they had scanned. And we started to do the work on it. And it was this really elaborate painting out process because there was a lot of anamorphic distortion, atmospheric haze, searchlights crisscrossing through the frame. So we'd worked for days on this. And then we got the call from the production. They said, we found the negative. So we're going to scan that and send it to you. And so, of course, we have this hope that maybe we could just take the new scan of the neg and just kind of feed it into exactly all the same work that we had just done. And that was so not the case. So this very same piece of film, just one generation different, looked so radically different. I mean, everything about it was different. The color was obviously different, but so was the level of sort of distortion, and just everything about the scan was completely different. We had to start the work completely over again. So when you talk about like going in here and like choosing a film stock, for example, right? So here are our color negative film stocks that we have to choose from. So the default is 5218. You can switch it to 5219. You see I get a slightly different look on the reds there. And these are telling you a little bit too about like what the film stock is designed, like what kind of lighting is designed. So this is a 500T, which means that it's ISO 500 and designed for tungsten light, whereas something like this 250D would be a faster film stock designed for daylight. Now you can see we don't do a whole color temperature shift on it because we assume that you don't want your footage to turn blue and orange when we switch film stocks. We assume that you've color timed it to neutrality, but you can see how shifting to a daylight film stock changed the highlight tonality quite a bit. And then we also have the separate emulation for the print stock. And a question that I get all the time is, what's the right choice? You know, or, you know, maybe you would want to find out from your, you know, production, like what your film that you're matching was shot on, so you could hopefully match it with this. And then maybe you would be disappointed if it didn't match exactly. And I want to kind of get back to this idea of like, film is not necessarily an exact science, or rather there are numerous places that creativity, subjectivity, and quality control can interject themselves into what we sometimes think of as a very technical process. If I shoot on this film stock, it will look like this. Okay, but yeah, then how was it printed? You know, on what film stock? Or if it wasn't printed, how was it scanned? What was the type of scanner and how was it treated after that? We've almost never seen, we very much never have seen a piece of film that didn't have extremely professional, creative, smart, technically adept people interjecting a lot of subjective control over how the image that we're looking at looks in the final equation. So part of why we love film, in fact, I would venture to say a huge reason that we love film, was the gatekeeperiness of film, that all the film we've ever seen in our life has been made by masters of the craft. And so to me, the important part of Magic Bullet Film was not to make this rigorous technical exercise of like, I guarantee you that this is a rigid simulation of this particular film stock. To me, the more important thing were these creative controls. So for instance, like a color temperature control could really just change the feel of this shot from something sort of apocalyptic to something kind of rosy and romantic, you know, even though there's a zombie in it. Same with tint here, you know, like if I go to a greenish thing and then a coolish thing here, like I'm really telling a very different story, you know. But what's nice is that if I were to just apply, you know, Colorista to the shot, I've got that same control. I've got that same temperature and tint control here, but it's a little more clinical. You know, this is really meant to be like a Swiss Army knife of color here. Like this is just one part of the process. I might be working under a LUT here or whatever. Like these are very dispassionate, kind of unopinionated white balance controls here. Whereas in film, they're working actually in an emulation of that analog process. So what's happening is you're shooting on this digital negative here, or this simulation of this Kodak negative, and then the color temperature process is happening in kind of in printer points in a digital emulation of a lab, and then the print stock gets involved. So so it's just a much more kind of organic expression of these basic color tools that we're used to here,
Stu,
including things like saturation. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There was a question about, you know, what you applying film right to the clip, but would you do ever like a basic balance, like, you know, like curves, levels, adjustment ahead of time, and then apply film to that? That was one of the questions.
Absolutely. So, and that's kind of the other part of this, is that we wanted you to feel comfortable with film being like a part of this balanced breakfast, you know. So absolutely, I'd be the last person to tell you, you know, don't do that. In fact, let's just jump into a different clip here. So this is from a film I shot a couple of years ago. I shot on Sony a7S II, and rather than apply Magic Bullet film to it in S-Log3, by the way, so this is a log shot. So I'm going to apply Magic Bullet looks to this clip, and we'll pop into looks. And I basically want to do the same kind of film process to this, but I know that this was shot log, and so I can start right away by identifying that aspect of my footage here. So whereas in Magic Bullet Film we had video, flat, and log, here in Magic Bullet Looks we have this huge list of inputs here. So I can go down to S-Log3 and pick that as my input. And you can see what happens here. This is just kind of interesting right off the bat. Like, this doesn't make the image look good, but what this does is it makes the image look like a digital version of the light that was present on the day, which is kind of neat. And you can actually see that on our beautiful scopes over here. I'll make them a little bit bigger. So just like the After Effects scope we were looking at, we've got, I guess in this case, we've got the RGB parade. So here's our RGB values, but you could see that we have modeled the fact that the light on the day was brighter, you know, than the maximum sort of normal exposure, right? Because we shot on log, we captured a huge broad dynamic range. Good for us. So you can see our bright blue sky back here has values, you know, has HDR values. And those values are being preserved through the entire Magic Bullet Looks pipeline. And this is a fun thing to kind of know about the interior workings of Magic Bullet Looks. Since version 1.0, however many years ago, we've always done all of the processing for Magic Bullet Looks in linear floating point. That gets back to that idea of my kind of visual effects background. So if I just apply an exposure effect and start bringing down the values, you can see that even though it looked overexposed, all those values are preserved there. And we've been doing that since day one. Now, what we can do here is there's always been this kind of, oh, well, let's actually just jump into film here. So what we did in Magic Bullet, and you know, just as a refresher for those who are familiar, or as information if you don't know, all of the sort of presets in Magic Bullet, you know, work on this idea of this little tool, this row of tools down here that are processed from left to right. So in this case, we've got a lens vignette, then some HSL colors, then this idea of a filmic kind of shoulder being applied here to get that nice highlight roll off, and ending with Renoiser, which is our grain engine. So this look is, you know, the sum total of all of these tools, but the order matters, right? If I just take two of these tools and reorder them, I get a slightly different look, you know, and if I put the shoulder down here, I get a very different look. So the, and we've got the input and the output. And you'll notice that even when I applied this preset, it remembered, you know, what my input was there. So I can just go through and kind of delete these guys. The point is that every preset is essentially kind of a bespoke, unique color corrector with, you know, just like nodes in Resolve. It's like every one of those does a job, and the order and the settings all kind of matter. And when you apply a preset, we always pre-select one of the tools that we think is going to be the most useful one for you to adjust. So what that means is that instead of having one Magic Bullet Film tool, we actually have two, because why not actually give you some extra control over the negative and the print, and allow you to do stuff in between. So I can apply the film negative tool, and then I can apply the film print tool, and the combined total will match the results from Magic Bullet Film. But now I have the extra ability to do stuff in between. So for example, now I can say, remember before when I adjusted that exposure, let's do that again. So let's overexpose this film, and let's remember that digital example of overexposure where we had the peaked out white sky. And now let's look at a more filmic overexposure, and you can see that I'm holding a lot of detail. I can still see his eyeball even though I'm overexposed by 4 stops. That's just like that example where I was multiplying all those layers together. If I put that exposure in between the neg and the print, I get a slightly different look. Now, this is an emulation of pulling the film stock, rating the film stock at for a slower speed. I can do the same thing. I can underexpose the film stock, right, and get a different look. Maybe that one's not so great. So, but that is a different look than underexposing the neg, right? So, so there's all kinds of fun things I can do here, including, you know, jump into some of the tools like a vignette or any of the many ways that Magic Bullet can do stuff that LUTs and traditional color correction can't really do, right? So one of my favorite ones is this haze flare tool, which because there's so much bright light in the sky, it's a little overpowering, but if I just reduce it down a little bit, you can just get this kind of nice idea that like a little bit of light was kind of spilling around in the camera there. And I can also, like I said, insert corrections in between the neg and the print. And what I would do, just kind of as a pro tip here, when we first introduced Magic Bullet Film, we had a pretty simplistic grain engine in it. And that was just purely based on performance. We just wanted film to be a real-time tool. Computers have gotten a lot faster these days, and in between there, we've created the VFX suite, and we were just really studying a lot about grain. And so we created this tool called Renoiser, which is secretly like the greatest grain emulation tool out there, and we're doing a terrible job of letting people know that. So what I would do is I would take the grain of these tools and reduce it, and go here to Renoiser and throw that on there at the end, because the grain that you get is just so much more beautiful. The Renoiser grain engine is just magic. Like, I'll pick a really extreme example here. So here's a Super 8 film stock. Or even if I were to pick like the 16mm preset, you can see that it's not just overlaying a layer of grain on top of the image. It's actually pushing the pixels around. It's actually kind of rebuilding the image out of virtual grain. And so if I pick something like Modern 35, it's nice and subtle, but it still just has this texture. In fact, we have a control for that. We have a texture control, and it's just at 50% here, but if I increase it, I'm going to get even more of that kind of stirring up of the pixels from the virtual grain simulation there. So this would be kind of how I would tackle a film emulation. We still have all the same, you know, in looks where I wanted to like exercise a little more control over it. And I still have all the same, you know, film negative and print stock. We can go for like a Fuji look here. And what's the last thing I want to say about, I think what's kind of special about this way of working with Magic Bullet Film is that, just to jump back out and go to our zombie example here. So Magic Bullet Film is kind of like a fancier version of Magic Bullet Mojo. You have this nice tool in the Magic Bullet suite called Magic Bullet Mojo. And again, if I just apply the effect, it just is like, it's like MSG for your image, you know, like it just makes it taste better. And you don't have to do a lot, you know, this is the Mojo preset, but there's this light preset here that is just this subtle, like, you know, this like it just like increases color contrast and just kind of punches up the image. Editors love this tool for just, I don't know where this footage came from, and my client is coming in 5 hours and I just need to make it all look good. It's not the final color correction, but it's going to look great. But also I've seen many professional colorists just apply a light Mojo at the end of their process to just add a little, you know, like pinch of flaky salt at the just before the plate, you know, is served to the customer. So, but the point is here that it's meant to be the last step in your process. It's meant to be whatever your source footage was, whether it was video or log, and we have Log Pro and Mojo to handle if you've shot on some sort of extremely low contrast log source like Arri Alexa. It's whatever in and video out, and the film effect is the same. It's log or whatever in, and it's implicitly video out, and that's great for fast, right? But if you are working in something like Resolve, or even increasingly Premiere and others, you may have subsequent color management stuff that you are doing, and you want to integrate something like Magic Bullet Film, or even just any of the cool things you can do in Magic Bullet Looks into that pipeline. So in the most recent update to Magic Bullet Looks, we've added exactly that ability. So remember that when we specified what our footage was on the way in, we said it's S-Log3, but this whole time we've been saying, let's go out to sRGB. But I can go out to any of those things that I came in with. And this is what really elevates Magic Bullet Looks from a tool for video editors to a tool that any professional colorist can use in any capacity, whether you embrace the whole idea of getting the whole look, or whether you just want to use something cool like our beautiful chromatic aberration or lens distortion or haze flare or diffusion tools. So let's just pick same as input for our output. So now our input is S-Log3 and our output is same as input. And you can see a little preview of it here. You can always click on this little button here to get an sRGB preview of it. But as long as this output tool is selected, you'll get this little window here that's showing you what your output is going to be. So if I go back now to After Effects, you can see how that look, you know, basically here was the input and here's the output. So we've gone from log in to log out. Now that's not so useful here in After Effects where I don't have any subsequent stuff set up, but I believe we have a look at what that actually looks like to use this in Resolve with a full color managed pipeline inside of Resolve, right guys?
Yeah, definitely. I can show you that part, Stu.
Okay, cool.
So let me share my screen first.
So interesting, Stu, how this color correction has come on since it's the 17, 18 years or so since you first were working on Magic Bullet, and the resources we had actually on the desktop to now what we're able to do, and those different color manage and how it's evolved to be able to do this aspect. Do you see, or what kind of differences do you see now if you're approaching these problems for now versus back then?
Well, what's really interesting now is that in Magic Bullet Looks 1.0, we had this tabbed interface where we had an input tab and we had an output tab, and we had tools for Cineon log in, we had, you know, Cineon log out, we had linear in for a visual effects pipeline. We actually had this entire thing built in Magic Bullet Looks 1.0, and nobody wanted it or understood why they would use it, and they all felt like it was a burden to the process, and so we got rid of it because it was too much color management too soon. You know, it was like we kind of like ran up and like screamed like the phenomena of color management into what was actually meant to be just kind of a fun like do you know, version of color correction. And the world told us, no, we don't want that, go away. So we removed it. And then like 3 releases later, they were like, we love Magic Bullet, but we're just really annoyed that it doesn't have better color management. So the world has now told us that we needed to catch up and actually bring back our color management. Of course, you know, now I think it's a much better incarnation, and we've learned a lot in between. And with the popularity of things like ACEs and whatever, yeah, that was kind of the thrust of that blog post that I wrote, and it's just been kind of the amazing story of all of this, is that like now the sophistication of a typical, you know, curious visual artist who downloads Resolve and just wants to start to learn about color, their level of understanding of how all this stuff works is just stratospherically different than what it was, yeah, however many years ago. When you say the number, it makes me like shrivel up and turn into a prune, but yes, it's been a while.
Listen.
Yeah, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
You should see Resolve there.
Yeah.
So I think I can, how do you call it, describe what Stu said before by talking a little bit about the color management. So I think before the color management thing, you may approach this, how do you call it, this footage by, first, okay, I'll balance it by, playing around with the contrast, the saturations and everything, right? That was then, but now since you have color management, you can literally trust Resolve or any of your host software to do the transformations. And instead of doing it subjectively based on your eyes or on your screen, and it's also unsure if your screen is a well calibrated or not, you can literally trust the mathematical transformations behind that to transform your image to look good, literally. Well, there are several ways that you can do the color transformations, color space transformations, and color managements inside Resolve. One of it you probably saw in our previous webinar, that you can do it in project settings, but I think Diego will talk about that later on. What I want to show you is that you can also mimic your color management just being in the node tree. And as you can see here, if I'm showing you my project settings, my color management is in, my color science is in DaVinci YRGB, and the timeline color space is Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. So for example, if I want to work in ACES in the node tree, I can just simulate my own input device transform, and also my ODT, my output transform. So initially what that is by using the ACES transform OFX. So by setting up this IDT and ODT, I will be able to access the ACES color space, the AP1 color space. So for example, here, I will just specify my footage was shot in S-Log3 in this case. And then my output transform. So literally it's saying, hey, this is an S-Log3 footage, and please, could you go to ACES CC color space? And the node after that, it means the node after that will be in ACES CC color space. And then to transform back to our display color space, I will just simply do the opposite. So I will use the input transform as ACES CC, and my output transform as my display color space, in this case, the Rec 709 or sRGB. And it means now I have options, choices that I can use. So I can work before the color transformations in this case, meaning that I can work in the camera color space in the S-Log3, or I can work in the color manage color space, in this case, the ACCC, or if I wish, I can also work in Rec 709 by creating the working, how do you call it, the adjustment after the transform to Rec 709. But I don't want to do that. So let me just show you what I normally do, is that with Magic Bullet Looks, since as Stu already pointed out, with the, how do you call it, the color handling, the tool is way much more flexible nowadays. And let me search for Magic Bullet Looks. And for example, if I just want to work in ACES and trust Resolve to do all the transformations, I can do so just by simply drag and drop Magic Bullet Looks in between the transformations. And by clicking Edit Look, we'll be in the Look Designer interface. And here, I can select the input gamma to be in ACES CC. And then also, as Stu already mentioned before, I'll just how do you call it, reroute it back as the same as the input gamma. So in this case, I can use all the tools available in the Magic Bullet Looks. As you can see, Magic Bullet Looks doesn't only come with tons of presets, but it also comes with tons of tools, like really fun tools that you can use. So if I want to do the film emulations, if I'm dropping it the film negative here, and film print afterward. And if I want to change something in between, like for example, that, and I can just use four-way color corrector or Colorista in this case, and I can just maybe introduce something in like introduce a red in the using the global wheel. But also, for example, I can just use the preset that Stu already sent me before, and it was the preset that he built inside After Effects. And that is by just simply going to my custom looks, since I already copy and paste that. And to see where your presets at, you can just simply right click and show in Explorer in this case, since I'm on Windows, and it will how do you call it, show you the file locations. And in this case, I just simply click that, and voila, I got it. The only things that differs a little bit is that since Resolve has its own color managements here, you probably see a difference in saturations level and also the contrast level. But that thing, you can really adjust it to your taste. And another thing is that I can, as I see inside Magic Bullet Looks, Stu applied some tools that is literally a tool that you got by physically modifying your camera, tweaking your camera, like the lens vignette, for example, or a lens flare. That's a physical effects that you get on set. So if I want to emulate that on my camera color space, I can just simply drag and drop it from here. And right before my input transform, I can just create a node before that and drag and drop another Magic Bullet Looks. And here, I can simply just use the same presets, but drop the other one. And this should be from S-Log3 back to S-Log3. So now I have all the flexibility that I want. So if for instance, I want to add diffusions filter or something, anything in my camera color space, I can use that prior to the input transform. And I can also work changing the color or anything, do the color corrections in ACES color space between the transformations. And yeah, doing so, you have all the flexibility to approach your color corrections. And what's even nice is that sometimes when grouping your clips together, you will have two other more node group here, which is called the post group and pre-clip and post-clip groups. But if you work with a long project and you just want to use one looks to unify your project so that you have a consistent look, you can just use your output transform, the timeline clip, or in a post-clip group, and then you can also use Magic Bullet Looks actually here in the timeline, and it will affect all the entire project. And by doing so, you successfully mimicking the color managements that you normally set up in the project managements, and plus you have the flexibility to access the camera color space as well.
Good. So let me share my screen. So I will show you like another point of view.
Yes. I can make you a presenter. Where is it?
Yeah. So okay, so my point of view is that okay, as a colorist, you can start grading, I mean, leaf, gamma, gain, curves, and so on. But in some of the cases, and in more cases, they are asking you, hey, we need to make that look like film. And then you start like research and so on, and there are like some specific like characteristic of films. And right now there are like many even OTTs that are telling you, hey, buy this LUT package that has some like characteristic of film, and you can grade it based on that. And in some of the cases, they produce like good results, but in some of them, because as a colorist, you are like used to create things from zero, you feel like limited. You feel like, okay, it's a LUT, but the problem of a LUT is that you don't feel, I mean, you don't know what is it, and you cannot manipulate what is inside. So based on that, one of the things that I like about looks is that, okay, you have the emulation, but you have all the control. And usually when I like start grading, before I start grading, I think on my project, and then I make a node structure based on what I wanted to do. And in this case, I was like, okay, I definitely need to apply a film emulation, but I want to still work in Resolve. I still want to work with the curves, with the, oh, sorry. Oh, wait, crash. I still want to work with the curves, with the power windows, with the qualifier. So I don't want to work with just one tool. I want to mix the both of the two worlds. So based on that, I
see your screen anymore, Diego, by the way.
yes, don't worry, it's restarting.
All right, okay.
Yeah, wait me.
It happens.
Yeah. Okay, so based on that, probably let me show my screen now. There you go. Oh, it crashed again. No, enough. Okay, so based on that, I create this node structure when I had the control, and in this case, I mean, as Mask said, in some cases we can work in aces, but I mean, it's not in most of the cases that we work in aces. We can work also with visual color management, but we can work without any color transformation. And that is one of the abilities right now that you have with the color handling looks. So for example, here what I have is the first node structure. I did thinking on the project. I import the looks preset Stu sceners, and then I check what was inside, and I start like making my own fixes. And for example, I have one result here where I have some adjustment in the exposure. I make a pop doing contrast, and I also here create a qualifier like to rescue a little bit of the skin, also some power windows, and here a vignette. And definitely the grain is something really awesome, so I apply it at the end. So in this case, I'm using the looks here as the key of the recipe, but I can also go inside and start like fixing the temperature and so on. And the great thing also is I have the opacity. With the opacity, I can say, no, definitely I want less or I want more, and I can start like fixing with it. And what is the best things about it is that, I mean, it makes you really fast as a colorist because you can have like multiple versions and start like having the best things of the two worlds, of the fastest things in Resolve that you have like play time in real time, and you can compare, and also the film emulation, you have it here, and if you want to enter, you can go inside the looks interface and you can refine it. So that is, I don't know, like my starting point in this. Let's think about unmanaged color, like a starting point in Resolve, but adding the looks in a node structure and as a part of my colorist workflow.
Awesome.
That's really
Great.
interesting. As Yost points out on the questions, a little bit of looks and a little bit of Diego.
Yeah.
So it's good.
And that is like, that honestly, as the creator of the tool, that is like such music to my ears, because I think for the longest time, I think people really looked at looks as kind of this like very heavy barbecue sauce for their image, you know, where it was just like it was going to dominate the flavor, and that was kind of the only way to use it. But seeing people feel comfortable to just dip in and use a little bit of it in one part of their color pipeline and a little bit of it somewhere else, that was always my intention. Like, it is this little, you know, once you get inside of looks, you know, I had to build a box, but in the box, I give you all these cool little Legos, right? And I want you to play with the Legos, you know, but I had to welcome you into the box first, you know. And so now I feel like the boundaries of that box have softened up so much, because we can hand the image back and forth in such a variety of, you know, color spaces that are compatible with just about any host application, just about any workflow. The use cases for looks have really opened up, you know. And if a director or a client falls in love with a look that they've been playing with on their laptop, they can literally just share that preset to their colorist working in Resolve and get the exact same results, but plus the benefit of the experience and eye and taste of their professional colorist that we're working with. And that's just, you know, my dream come true for the scope of how looks can be used in a pipeline that goes from, you know, a first time, you know, YouTuber just trying to make their video look cool to someone who's working on a feature film.
That's really true. The tool is really flexible. Thank you for building up that tool, Stu. And one more thing that I forgot to showcase previously is that the Renoiser, it's such a great tool, Renoiser, and especially as you pointed out in your presentations, film has its own magic. The more you push it, it shows a different characteristic. And what's nice is that in the Renoiser, you also have the ability to change the amount of grain in the red channel or blue channel or green channel. And not just that, you can also change the amount of grain or the size based on the tonal range. So you can just change it in the highlight regions or in the midtones regions or in the shadow. What I realized that while playing with the footage that you provide us, I try around with the Renoiser, and just by cranking the grain in the highlight area, it looks way much more pleasant to my eyes. Because as you pointed out, the more you push it, it behaves, you know, it gives you something back.
Thanks.
That's
Yeah,
really
Renoiser
cool.
is definitely designed with that idea in mind that there's no bad settings, right? You can just kind of push it in whatever direction you want. You should get plausible results, you know.
One thing
I
that
wanted
you
to add one
kind of
thing.
mentioned, I was just going to hand it over to you, Anthony, because one thing you mentioned in that, Stu, was the kind of democratization of this. So we're looking at it from the point of view of people who are really high end, but also Resolve is also giving us the ability to add this on the timeline as an editor. And I think Tony's got a great example of that, because there's a number of ways you can work with it.
Yeah, so I just want to show the editor perspective of this, and I'll try to keep it short and simple, and just so we don't alienate anybody who's not necessarily proficient in the color page, because it is used to also be a simple tool to kind of either get you to the idea or hand the idea off to a colorist, or, you know, that's the simple spice that you can add on before your client walks in the door. So I'm just going to show two quick things. There is the passive way of doing it, which is on the adjustment clip, which is like an adjustment layer inside of Adobe After Effects or Adobe Premiere or even Photoshop. And then you also have right in here, if I just add this, we can also, I'll just open up Looks. And when I'm in Looks, I think it's not sharing, it's only sharing Resolve. Give me 1 second. There you go. So inside of here, I have Stu's preset that I've already imported, and it lives inside of this preset folder. If you go in here, you can hand these off. So I think I put it inside of this one here. This is the one that he handed us all. And this is just a simple file that you can use it on Mac, PC, and as long as it lives inside of this folder structure, it's gonna live inside of here. And when you go to your presets, you can share all of your presets. So if somebody makes it on the Mac, on the PC, you can share that. If you wanna give it to the colorist, you can give it to the colorist. They can add it on a node. And, you know, again, the idea is the simplicity and the fact that it's consistent. So now I can take this back into Resolve and I can use this as well. So let me just commit to this and it'll send me right back to Resolve. And again, you know, also, if you see that you just kind of want to add this as a subtle spice, you can try doing it here on the adjustment layer as well. I mean, the adjustment layer, the adjustment clip. And then if you go into the color page, the adjustment clip will pop up as well. And just one quick little pro tip, if you go here inside of my edit timeline and I turn off I disable that video track. Now when I go over here, when I go back to the color page, now the only thing I'm gonna see is on V2, and I turned off, I won't see any more of V1 on here. So you can just work on just that in a more passive way. So there's a handful of ways to handle this. And this is just, again, if you're on the edit side and you just want to send the idea over to the colorist, you don't have to be the colorist. You can still be very proficient in Looks or any of the Magic Bullet, you know, the suite itself, and it's still relatively easy to convey your idea down the line. So that's all I
Yeah,
wanted.
you can stretch that adjustment clip to cover a whole
Yes,
time
several clips.
of clips, right? So you can pick a look and just focus on creative editorial, but your client or you yourself, you're not getting distracted by the fact that everything looks like flat log footage, or worse still, you don't have that phenomenon that we all had to live through a handful of years ago, where clients were falling in love with the flat look of their digital footage, and the colorist was all ready to add all this punch and saturation, and the client was like, no, we fell in love with
They just want log. They just want you to shoot it log.
Man,
Yep.
that killed me. I'm glad we're over that trend.
Yeah, and I will add that this is in some way like accomplishing one of the objectives of color management. That is like editors, VFX, colorists can look at the same images, and that is one of the things we like about it. I mean, just look file and we can share it around platforms, and this is really important.
One quick, I know we're slightly over time, so we are winding it up now. Thank you for your patience, everyone. But just whilst we got you, Stu, one quick question is that something we get a lot when we're on training sessions, and this is from Unike, and saying, as you're a starting out colorist, as they are, what advice would you give how to start out? What would you suggest would be a good place to begin?
Yeah, so one of the things that I felt was really helpful back in the day, this is harder now. It's really sad to me. I learned so much about filmmaking from DVDs and then Blu-rays that had like rich, kind of behind the scenes material and stuff. It used to be a real marketing tool to try to get you to buy a shiny disc with a movie on it, that they had all this supplemental material, and that stuff is a little harder to come by now. But I guess the trade-off is that a lot of that kind of promotional material is available on YouTube and other sources. So what you can sometimes do is, and if you dig back far enough in my blog, you can see examples of this, where there would be either a deleted scene from a movie or just a behind the scenes look at how they were filming it. And you could compare the visual look of that with the final film. And it's almost like getting a before and after, right? So you almost see like, kind of what the colorist almost was handed versus what they came up with in the session. And what an incredible, valuable thing that is, right? Because you really, what happens over time, if you watch a movie that has a really aggressive look, is that, especially if you're in a darkened environment like a theater, you have no kind of reset, gray card to look at and to sort of reset your eye what's normal. So I remember like watching Inside Llewyn Davis, the Coen Brothers film, and just loving the movie and just really being focused on how much I loved the music that was in it. And a director friend of mine called me afterwards and said, "You love the movie? What did you think of that aggressive color grade that they did?" And I thought, I didn't even think about it once. I was so focused on the sound. And I went back and looked, I'm like, oh my God, this movie is like so hammered on from a color correction perspective. It's like unrecognizable. It's like they invented the most bizarre film stock to shoot this movie on. I didn't notice at all because that wasn't what I was thinking about. I was just enjoying the movie, and it's kind of a reminder that you can, if you do it artfully, you can create a world for the viewer where weird color is normal, and they will just go along for the ride, just like Christopher Nolan can create a movie where you can't hear any of the dialogue and you're like, yep, that's normal, that's fine, I'm enjoying it, like you can really bring the audience on a journey. And when you get to see the before and after from, even if you kind of have to pull it from multiple sources to kind of create it for yourself, you could certainly then go on and do the exercise of trying to recreate it. I'm not going to tell you not to do that, but to me, it's less about trying to sketch from the masters than it is about just realizing that they have a lot more creative leeway than you might think, and it's really hard if you're used to a client environment, because if you start with a sort of normal looking image and then you just push it green, we are all like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park, right? We all see movement, right? So what's happened over the course of this webinar, we've been talking for an hour. What's happened is that the sky outside is getting brighter, and this wall next to me, this wall has turned blue, you know, and you haven't noticed it happen. But if you could rewind the webinar and see, this wall started off kind of neutral color balance and it's turned blue. Nobody noticed because it happened over such a great amount of time, you know. So you can teach the audience what's normal, and you can lull them into a sense of normalcy with just about any kind of color correction. Now, having said that, the counterpoint to that, and the other thing that I've learned in sessions with professional colorists, I remember I was working with a colorist at Technicolor, and he had like it wasn't a Michael Bay movie, but it in that tradition of like that kind of extremely punchy, poppy action movie kind of look. He had that up as well, and we were looking at it together. And I was just looking at this like kind of classic, you know, like punchy action movie, like Magic Bullet Mojo kind of look. And I was just like, you know, how many nodes did it take to do that? And he said 1. And he showed it to me, and he did it entirely with primary offset gamma gain. That was it. He had one little funky S curve that he ubiquitously used on the whole show. Other than that, he did it all with primaries. There were no secondaries. And this was with a classic example where the skin tones are popping off the screen, and like, you know, haters in the audience are going, teal and orange, like, and it was just, he just did it with just, you know, shadows, highlights. And it was like, I was blown away. The combination was because the movie was beautifully shot. The actors are in professional makeup. They're famous for a reason. They're very good looking. But it was also like this guy understood the aspect of his job, which was to satisfy his client and work fast, right? And so one thing I would caution against is sometimes you see, and I know that this has become a joke and kind of a meme, but sometimes you see like a tutorial in Resolve that's like step 1, 75 nodes, you know, and then step 2, 1,000 things, you know. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of colorists out there who don't work that way. they work fast because they got you know 2,500 shots to do in 4 days, you know. And so they look at every you know qualifier, every tracked you know mask, every little bit of fix or tweak on a shot as a potential time liability that's going to take quality away from somewhere else in the show. So so it's kind of like my double-edged sword of advice is on one hand, it's okay to keep it simple. You're not doing your job. You know, just the composer of a film is not doing their job if they leave one part of the film without score, you know, and you are not doing your job if you just do a very subtle tweak on a couple shots. On the other hand, you know, go for it because the audience doesn't care. Like, and if you've been beaten down by conservative clients who are like, why are you trying to make my Listerine commercial look like a David Fincher film? When you have that opportunity to go for it, you can, because the audience will go along for the ride. And one way to see that is to seek out these kind of befores and afters that are kind of almost accidentally being offered up to you by comparing the behind the scenes footage from a film to the finished piece.
That's great advice. As they say in many disciplines, including product design, reference.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool to find these kind of nuggets out, because you're absolutely right. We come from a standpoint that you could choose everything, and so what if everything's available? What do you choose? So it is in part contextual, but that's a great way of looking at it. We've tying up this month now, and so apologies for everyone letting us overrun, but I think you'll agree it's been worth it. We had some comments down the questions saying we need more Stu. So
Yeah, definitely.
we might end up
Stu.
inviting you back at some point, Stu, for this, because this has been so interesting.
It's my pleasure. This is really fun. You guys made it really easy for me, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in and contributing their questions. It's really fun to talk directly to folks this way.
Fantastic, excellent. Likewise, it's win-win. What I'll do is I just want to share something about next week, and I'm going to let Max wrap up for the last number of weeks and so on
Sure.
for what everyone's been covering, and do the thanks to especially to Tony and Diego for all your generous help. I've kind of done it, Max, but you can do it again. But I just wanted to share just very quickly. Let's just share here what we're looking at. Here we go. Stuff that's happening next month. And we have over on the Maxon site, if you go to the events page, it's just under the news button. So just go to news events. We have loads and loads of sessions happening. And you can see Seth and Harsh's weekly live show, VFX and Chill, as well as the some of the additional, like the After Effects online meeting and SIGGRAPHs up there. So it's not just us, it's meetings and sessions for a whole host of related disciplines. But two things I wanted to mention. One is next month, it's not yet listed on here, it'll be up here in a day or so. We are doing a whole series on title design, where we're looking at the entire tool set across Maxon One. So you can do titles in 3D text and 2D text, and we'll be looking at Cinema and Redshift and all the Red Giant tools that you can use to make beautiful titles. And then, as they say, this should be on the Universe poster, by the way, then make them look terrible with all the distressing that you can do with the Universe tools. So we'll be looking at that, and we've got some great artists and trainers lined up for that. But also next month, I just want to give a shout out to Max's amazing session. He's doing 6 weeks of a complete intro to color grading. And this is called Hands-On with Maxon. And we've done one for an introduction to cinema. We've done one for an introduction to particle creation and After Effects and cinema. And then what Max is doing one taking you right down to the basics and the theory and why you would apply one particular color and how you then apply it. And these are 2-hour sessions over a series of 6 weeks where you can follow along. And Max is going to be sharing all his generous knowledge that he's accumulated over the years. And you're putting this primarily together in Resolve, Max, but you're also featuring some aspects of Premiere, so you can apply these techniques in whichever host you're using, can't you?
Exactly. It will be a great deal of balance between Resolve and Premiere Pro, Simon.
Fantastic, great. So since you've been the host, Max, for the last 4 weeks, please let me don't let me steal your thunder, please.
You pretty much sum up everything.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. I think you will agree it's such a great session. Thank you, Stu, for your time. Thank you, Diego and Tony. So if you want to catch up and rewatch the recordings, you can do so by heading to our YouTube channel, Maxon Training Team. And a couple of hours after the webinar is finished, we will just upload it in the YouTube channel, so you can follow along. If there is any file provided for a follow along project, you can find it normally in the video descriptions of the video. And yeah, don't forget to get your free t-shirts. 1 order per person, please. And the code's only valid for 1 order, by the way. And you will need to pay for the shipping cost only. The t-shirt will come for free. And then if you want to check more about Stu, if you want to learn more about Stu, or you want to get his insights, feel free to visit him in prolost.com. It's a collection of such a great readings. Me, myself, I learned a lot from this website. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and have a nice one. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.